I started playing guitar about 1960. Um, my brother was a banjo player, had a classroom teacher as a fifth grader who played three-finger style banjo, and uh, put a mark on my brother that he never got over. Um, I'm not sure that just being left-handed made him a banjo player, but I think it had something to do with that. But my family couldn't afford a master tone, or at least were unwilling to make that type of expenditure for a 12-year-old at the time that he felt that's what he wanted. And at the time I was in high school shop and had had a lot of experience tinkering and building everything from furniture to surfboards, and so I naturally thought I could build a better banjo. After I proved that that wasn't possible, I started searching out music stores to see if I could buy remnants of old instruments that were the parts and pieces I need to try again. In the search for banjo parts, I also found there were a lot of broken old guitars. And after I played for a little while, um, the, the town that I lived in was adjacent to Los Angeles, LAX, where the practice at the time in the early 60s was to break every guitar that was put on an airplane. And so once the people recovered their splinters from the conveyor belts, they brought them to our store for an appraisal of the cost of repair or replacement. Uh, Even though they seemed to be breaking them pretty regular, they were also willing to step up and take care of their customers at the time, and would give them a voucher for the repair or replacement, for some portion of it anyways. The store that I had worked was Westchester Music, and they didn't take in any trades. And I convinced my boss that I would buy all of the repairs if he would allow that at the cost that they deemed the value to be for trade-in purposes. And so I began to do these repairs at home on these, what we would now consider vintage instruments. At the time, they were just broken guitars. And they were everything from Martins and Mauers to Gibsons and Guilds and whatever else was out there. But predominantly, they were the instruments that had been built out of the best materials available at the time, and to a refined spec, unlike the guitars that were being built during the early 60s, which were a little heavier. So they were more durable, and the ones that I was repairing were kind of built on the edge of longevity and performance. So I had a chance to learn from these instruments what I believe contributes to the overall performance of a guitar, and kind of view firsthand what the material package would be. I worked at that store for a number of years, and then got an invitation to tour the Far East with Uncle Sam for a while, and was lucky enough to be on a repair ship in the Navy. And it was a floating city. It had every type of tool and piece of machinery that I'd even ever heard about. And with a long time at sea and nothing to do at times, I made friends of machinists and pattern makers, and had access to, of course, build banjos on board the ship. They had a foundry. I could cast a tone ring if I needed it, and these guys had nothing better to do than help this kid that wanted to learn something about what they were doing. They had a great pattern shop with abundant materials, lots of pattern grade Honduras mahogany, and so getting parts and pieces to build out of wasn't too difficult. And I had my folks send me hooks and nuts and stuff like that for the parts that we wouldn't manufacture. But I had a chance to see how machinery turned rough material into finished parts on a professional scale, something that I had not really been able to do other than with wood. After that tour was up and I returned to the States, I went to work for Westwood Music, Fred Wallachy's store. And I worked there for a number of years, and worked both in sales, and I worked for the repair department there. and eventually was teased away from them to open my own place by McCabe's Guitar Shop, and did their repair on anything that was beyond replacing a nut, saddle, or gluing a bridge down. And there was lots and lots of work. This is the early 70s, and music is coming back strong. It had taken a hiccup for a few years, but it was now alive with a new generation of pickers, and acoustic music was very, very heavily sought after at that time, as well as new emerging phases of rock. And so there were a lot of people at that time building instruments, always building without the opportunity or aid of schooling or books, and there virtually was nothing there but conversation and old guitars to be our instructors. After that period of time, I relocated. I actually closed my little studio. I had a number of apprentices working with me, and I was a little irresponsible with the success that I had been offered, and so thought it might be better to change my address. And I closed the guitar shop, and I moved to Colorado for a couple of years, and then on up into Montana. And during that time in Montana, I went to work for a gun manufacturing company run by a man by the name of Wolfgang Droge. And he had bought the rights and patents to build the Sharps rifle, a breech-loading gun that has a lot of historic fame associated with it. And I was the gun fitter. I put the wood to the metal. And so working with this guy who really was a tool and die man and fixture genius, he could set up a tool to do any operation. I learned another level of application of repeat performance based on using tools with exacting tolerance, which up to that time I had used a Hershey bar and a brick to do all my measuring and work with, and had a chance to really understand how accurate things could be built. This is the late 70s, early 80s that I'm doing this, and I had a gun shop in town in Big Timber, Montana, where I built muzzle-loading rifles and did some restocking of high-powered rifles, and I worked for Sharps. I also was in a church band and traveled, and one evening while having dinner with our pastor, I received a call from a fella in Bozeman, Montana by the name of Steve Carlson. Steve was the head and owner of Flatiron Mandolin, and Flatiron Mandolin was just beginning to move into the archtop mandolin business. They had just built a great tool. It was a slave carver. It was a rough out tops and backs, and it produced more parts than they could put together, and they knew they could grow. They just needed a little horsepower. Somehow Steve found out that I was in Montana and close by, and that evening called and offered me a job. And I was polite and I listened to him, and I was really flattered that he would consider making this offer to me. And I listened to the offer, and I thanked him for it, and I said, I just don't think I can do it. I have my business, which I run 3 days a week, and I work 410s at the gun factory, and then I'm busy with the band on the weekends, and we travel. And he said, but I'll pay you $1,800 a month. And I said, I'll see you in the morning. And so I went over the next day, and we talked about a business plan and what he was hoping to achieve and the growth that he anticipated, and offered me an opportunity to be part of that.